Hello everyone, and welcome to RadioCSIRT English Edition, your daily cybersecurity briefing. I am Marc Frederic Gomez, your French cybersecurity voice covering today's threat landscape. I hope you are doing well. In this episode, large language models and cybersecurity, from the Claude 4.6 family to Project Glasswing, a complete analysis of the offensive and defensive capabilities of Anthropic's new generation of artificial intelligence, and what this means concretely for SOC teams, CERTs, and information security officers. Before getting into the substance, we need to establish the context in which this episode sits. We are in April 2026. The question of the impact of large language models on the cyber threat landscape is no longer theoretical. It is operational. Threat intelligence teams have been observing for several months an acceleration in the sophistication of phishing campaigns, a reduction in the time between vulnerability publication and the appearance of a functional exploit, and an improvement in the quality of artifacts produced by actors who did not, until recently, have the technical expertise required to build them. Large language models are at the center of this dynamic. They are not the only variable, but they are a determining one. And the publication by Anthropic of its Claude 4.6 range, combined with the revelation of Project Glasswing and the Claude Mythos preview model, makes a structured analysis of this question indispensable. Let us start with what we know about the Claude 4.6 range. Anthropic currently offers 3 models in its active lineup: Claude Opus 4.6, Claude Sonnet 4.6, and Claude Haiku 4.5. These 3 models share several fundamental characteristics that distinguish them from previous generations and that have direct implications for security professionals, whether on the defensive side or on the risk assessment side. The first common characteristic is the context window. Claude Opus 4.6 and Claude Sonnet 4.6 both have a context window of 1 million tokens. Claude Haiku 4.5 has a window of 200,000 tokens. To understand what this represents concretely, a token corresponds approximately to 3/4 of a word in English. A 1 million token window allows ingesting and processing simultaneously volumes of data that would have required sequential or fragmented processing with previous models. On the defensive side, this opens significant use cases: complete analysis of a source code repository to identify vulnerabilities, processing of a complete event log over several weeks, simultaneous correlation of thousands of indicators of compromise in a single call. On the offensive side, that same capability allows a malicious actor to analyze in a single request the entirety of an exfiltrated proprietary codebase to identify the most exploitable entry points without having to fragment the analysis and reconstruct the results manually. The second characteristic is output capacity. Claude Opus 4.6 supports a maximum output of 128,000 tokens in synchronous mode. Claude Sonnet at the 4.6 and Claude Haiku 4.5 support 64,000 tokens. And via the message batches API with the output dash, 300k beta header, Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6 go up to 300,000 output tokens. 300,000 output tokens in a single response is the capacity to generate a complete analysis report, a functional tool, a documented exploit, or a complete set of contextualized phishing lures in a single operation. Again, this is a symmetrical capability. It serves the SOC analyst generating a detailed forensic investigation report just as much as it serves the offensive actor generating a personalized spear phishing campaign at scale. The third common characteristic is multimodal support. All current Claude models support text and image input. Image processing capability is not trivial in a security context. It allows analyzing screenshots of configuration interfaces, reading network architecture diagrams, extracting information from visual artifacts in the context of forensic analysis, or conversely generating convincing visual lures for social engineering campaigns. The fourth characteristic is native multilingual support. All Claude 4.6 models are capable of producing and understanding content in multiple languages at a quality level that distinguishes itself from what previous models allowed. For threat intelligence teams tracking actors operating in Farsi, Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, or Korean, this capability is operationally useful. It also allows actors whose native language is not English to produce idiomatically correct English phishing lures without the linguistic markers that historically allowed informed users to identify fraudulent communications. Let us now go into the specifics of each model. Claude Opus 4.6 is positioned as the most intelligent model in the range, with top-tier performance in reasoning, coding, and long context processing. Its pricing is $5 per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens. This pricing is relevant for risk assessment. At $5 per million input tokens, access to expert-level reasoning capabilities is economically accessible to a considerably wider range of actors than the cost of equivalent human capabilities allowed. An experienced security analyst costs hover between $150 and $300 per hour depending on the market. Claude Opus 4.6 offers a comparable level of reasoning for certain defined analytical tasks at a cost measured in cents per query. This economic asymmetry is structural, and it has direct implications for the risk profile of organizations that do not integrate it into their threat model. Claude Opus 4.6 also supports extended thinking and adaptive thinking. Extended thinking is a capability that allows the model to conduct extended internal reasoning before producing its response, a form of computational deliberation that significantly improves performance on complex tasks requiring multiple reasoning steps. Adaptive thinking is a variant where the model dynamically adjusts the depth of this reasoning based on the perceived complexity of the request. For offensive use cases, extended thinking means that an actor can submit a description of a complex target environment and receive in return a coherent multi-step attack chain, taking into account the operational constraints and defense mechanisms described. For defenders, extended thinking is precisely what is needed for advanced threat analysis tasks: correlation of disparate indicators, reconstruction of attack chains from fragmentary artifacts, assessment of a complex architecture's exposure to a specific TTP. Claude Sonnet 4.6 is positioned as the optimal combination of speed and intelligence. It is priced at $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens. It has the same 1 million token context window as Opus, also supports extended thinking and adaptive thinking, and has lower latency than Opus. For security workflows requiring near real-time processing, automated alert enrichment, security ticket triage, log stream analysis, Sonnet 4.6 represents the balance point between analytical capability and operational responsiveness. Claude Haiku 4.5 is the fastest model in the range, priced at $1 per million input tokens and $5 per million output tokens. It supports extended thinking but not adaptive thinking, and its context window is limited to 200,000 tokens. It is the model suited for high-volume, low-complexity workflows, automated classification of phishing emails at scale, entity extraction in threat intelligence feeds, generation of executive summaries for incidents. An important technical point concerns the knowledge cutoff dates. Claude Opus 4.6 has a reliable cutoff in May 2025 and a training data end date of August 2025. Claude Sonnet 4.6 has a reliable cutoff of August 2025 and a training data end date of January 2026. Claude Haiku 4.5 has a cutoff of February 2025. For threat intelligence teams, this distinction between reliable cutoff and training data end date is operationally significant. The model's knowledge of events close to the training end date is less reliable and less comprehensive than its knowledge of periods prior to the reliable cutoff. Queries about recent campaigns, actors, or vulnerabilities must therefore be handled with this limitation in mind and supplemented by current threat intelligence sources. Another technical point deserves attention: the deployment architecture. Anthropic offers its models through 3 channels: the Direct API, AWS Bedrock, and Google Vertex AI. Bedrock and Vertex AI now offer several endpoint types: global endpoints for maximum availability, multi-region endpoints for Vertex AI, and regional endpoints to guarantee that traffic is routed within a specific geographic zone. For organizations subject to data sovereignty constraints or regulatory localization requirements, notably under NIS2, DORA, or sectoral banking frameworks, the choice of endpoint is not a secondary technical question. It is a compliance requirement that must be arbitrated with legal and compliance teams before any production deployment. Let us now address the question of the systemic impact of this generation of large language models on the threat landscape. This is not a speculative assessment. The observable signals in the field over the past 12 months converge towards several operational conclusions. First, the entry barrier for producing high-quality offensive artifacts has decreased considerably. A contextualized spear phishing email, grammatically correct, consistent with the register of the targeted organization, and incorporating references to recent events relevant to the target, could require 2 years ago several hours of work from a competent human operator. With a model of the current generation, that timeline is measured in seconds. At the scale of a campaign targeting thousands of organizations, the difference is qualitative, not merely quantitative. Second, the capacity for real-time adaptation of lures has changed in nature. Current models can be integrated into automated pipelines that dynamically personalize lures based on information collected about the target in real time, social networks, corporate websites, recent publications. This dynamic personalization reduces the effectiveness of classic awareness training programs, which teach identification of generic phishing markers. When phishing is perfectly personalized, those markers disappear. Third, the capacity for large-scale code analysis makes vulnerability identification in large code bases accessible to actors who did not have that expertise in-house. The vulnerability exploitation value chain, identification, understanding, weaponization, can now be partially automated. The window between patch availability and the publication of a functional exploit has historically been used as a prioritization indicator in patch management cycles. That window is compressing. On the defensive side, those same capabilities offer real operational gains. Large language model assisted forensic analysis allows processing volumes of artifacts that exceeded human capacity within the timelines imposed by incident management. Correlation of weak signals in voluminous event logs, reconstruction of attack chains from fragmentary artifacts, automatic generation of detection rules from descriptions of malicious behaviors. These are documented and operationally validated use cases. The question for security teams is therefore not whether to integrate large language models into their workflows, but how to do so in a secure, controlled manner that is compliant with their regulatory obligations. Let us now address the central subject of this episode, Project Glasswing and Claude Mythos Preview. These two elements deserve thorough treatment because they represent a break from Anthropic's usual positioning, and because their implications for the threat landscape are significant enough to have prompted an emergency meeting at the U.S. Department of the Treasury on April 7, 2026. Project Glasswing is the framework program under which Anthropic has restricted access to Claude Mythos Preview. According to documentation published by Anthropic, access to Mythos is limited to approximately 40 partner organizations. Confirmed names include Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. Access is not available on a self-serve basis. It is invitation only. Before any deployment, Anthropic conducted prior consultations with U.S. authorities on both the offensive and defensive dimensions of the model. The European Commission publicly endorsed the access restriction, citing large-scale cyber risks. The rationale for this restricted access architecture is directly linked to Mythos's documented capabilities. According to Anthropic's documentation, Claude Mythos Preview has the capability to identify and exploit flaws across all major operating systems and web browsers. It is capable of autonomously constructing sophisticated payloads and exploits at low cost and in real time. This last point deserves unpacking. Autonomously means without step-by-step human guidance. At low cost means with the same economic constraints as other models in the range, meaning at a few dollars per million tokens. In real time means with latencies on the order of seconds or tens of seconds, not hours or days. To understand why these capabilities justify restricted access, they need to be put in perspective with what the vulnerability research value chain represents. A competent security researcher specializing in vulnerability research on a specific operating system or browser requires several years of training and experience to reach the expertise level, allowing autonomous discovery and weaponization of zero-day class vulnerabilities. The zero-day market reflects this scarcity. An exploitable zero-day vulnerability in a major browser is valued between $100,000 and $500,000 on legal markets, and potentially more on gray or black markets. A model capable of performing this work autonomously, in real time, at a few dollars of inference cost, radically modifies the economics of vulnerability. The emergency meeting of April 7, 2026, at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, convened by Secretary Scott Bessent and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, with the participation of the CEOs of Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Wells Fargo, is the first public institutional signal that this assessment has been internalized at the highest level of American financial regulators. According to Bloomberg, this is the first time in American financial history that regulators at this level have treated the capabilities of a single AI model as justifying an emergency meeting with the leaders of systemically important institutions. The risk vectors identified in this context articulate around 6 dimensions. The first and most acute is zero-day exploitation. The capability to identify and weaponize unknown vulnerabilities in all major operating systems and browsers creates direct exposure for core banking systems and trading platforms. The second dimension is systemic SIFI risk for systemically important financial institution. If multiple institutions deploy AI infrastructure derived from the same model, a single compromise at the model level can trigger synchronized reactions across institutions simultaneously. This is the herd effect at systemic scale. Not one institution making a bad decision, but all institutions making the same bad decision at the same moment because they are all running the same model on the same input signals. The third dimension is algorithmic convergence in automated decision making, distinct from SIFI risk in that it does not require a compromise. It simply requires multiple actors using the same model on the same input signals to produce identical and potentially destabilizing behaviors at market scale. The fourth dimension concerns the exposure of DeFi infrastructure and smart contracts to instant automated exploitation at low cost. The fifth dimension is customer data exfiltration in the event of infrastructure compromise. The sixth dimension is the impact on cyber insurance portfolios. The actuarial models underlying existing cyber insurance products were not calibrated for a threat actor equipped with autonomous exploit generation. Premiums, coverage limits, and exclusion clauses require revision. An important legal element is worth noting. Anthropic is currently engaged in litigation with the U.S. Department of Defense, the Pentagon having classified the organization as a supply chain risk. Anthropic contests this classification in court. This litigation is relevant for organizations assessing the risk associated with adopting solutions based on Anthropic technology. It indicates that the governmental risk profile assessment of the company is the subject of active disagreement, and that this disagreement has potential implications for service continuity for certain categories of organizations. On the question of detection and defense, several points deserve attention. The first is that the 40 Project Glasswing partner organizations constitute a new supply chain attack surface. An organization with access to Mythos under Glasswing is a high-value target for an actor seeking indirect access to the model. Access controls, segmentation of environments where Mythos is deployed, and monitoring of abnormal usage behaviors are immediate priorities for the security teams of these organizations. The second point concerns behavioral detection. A model like Mythos, used in an offensive campaign, will produce observable behaviors in the target environment. Network requests, whose structure and timing differ from human behaviors, exploitation patterns consistent with automated rather than manual research, and a speed of adaptation to encounter defenses that exceeds human capabilities. Detection rules calibrated for human speed attack behaviors need to be reassessed. Detection must move earlier in the kill chain. Anomalous reconnaissance patterns, unusual API call sequences, out-of-profile network behavior before weaponization is complete. The third point concerns the attack surface specific to models deployed in production. A large language model deployed as a component of an application or service is itself an attack surface. Prompt injection techniques, injection of malicious instructions into data processed by the model to influence its outputs, and indirect exfiltration techniques via the model are documented vectors that require specific controls in any architecture integrating large language models. Security teams supervising large language model deployments in production must integrate these vectors into their threat models and incident response plans. Fourth point, the question of governance and regulatory compliance. The regulatory framework around large language models in Europe is evolving rapidly. The AI Act, DORA for the financial sector, and the ENISA guidelines on AI in critical systems create a set of obligations that apply to organizations deploying large language models in high-risk contexts. For information security officers in financial, healthcare, or critical infrastructure organizations, the question is no longer purely technical. It is one of compliance. And incidents involving large language models are not uniformly covered by exclusion clauses in existing cyber insurance policies. Clauses relating to autonomous acts of AI systems warrant urgent legal review. Fifth point, the evolution of training and awareness programs. Awareness programs that teach identification of generic phishing markers, spelling mistakes, unusual phrasing, urgent requests, lose part of their effectiveness against lures generated by models of the current generation. Training must evolve to incorporate practical cases based on examples of large language model generated lures and place greater emphasis on out-of-band verification processes rather than linguistic detection. Let us now look at the positive implications for defensive teams. The same analytical power that makes Mythos potentially dangerous in malicious hands is what makes models in the Claude 4.6 range valuable for defenders. A 1 million token context window allows analyzing in a single request the entirety of a codebase to identify vulnerability patterns, or ingesting all logs from an incident over several weeks to reconstruct a complete attack chain. Extended thinking capabilities allow a CTI analyst to submit a partial campaign description and obtain a structured analysis of attribution hypotheses, probable TTPs, and additional indicators to search for. Documented defensive use cases include automatic generation of Yara and Sigma rules from behavioral descriptions, automatic alert enrichment with threat context, drafting of forensic investigation reports from raw data, assisted threat modeling for new architectures, smart contract analysis for vulnerability identification, and adversary simulation for detection testing. These use cases do not replace human expertise. They augment it and allow resource-constrained teams to cover a broader operational perimeter. A final point on the question of trust and verification. Large language models hallucinate. They can produce incorrect information with an apparently high confidence level. In a threat intelligence context, a hallucination is potentially more dangerous than a gap, an incorrect attribution, an invented indicator of compromise, or an erroneous description of a TTP can lead to incorrect operational decisions. Any workflow integrating large language models in a security context must include explicit human verification mechanisms for outputs with high operational impact. Large language models are analytical augmentation tools, not infallible oracles. To synthesize the elements to watch in the coming weeks and months, the evolution of the Pentagon Anthropic litigation and its implications for Mythos accessibility and associated models for certain categories of organizations, the evolution of the regulatory framework around large language models in the financial and critical infrastructure sectors, notably the requirements that will emerge from discussions at the level of American and European regulators, the emergence of variants or derivatives of Mythos. The 40 Project Glasswing partner organizations represent a model access surface whose security cannot be considered uniform, and the evolution of the TTPs of offensive actors integrating large language models into their operational pipelines, a trend already measurable in the quality and personalization of observed campaigns, and which should intensify as access to the most capable models democratizes, legally or through other means. And that's it, this episode ends. I hope it will provide you with clear and useful information. Until then, we don't think, we patch. If you are a new listener, feel free to subscribe to the RadioCSIRT podcast. We are available in both English, Italian, Spanish, and French on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, Deezer, and Spotify. All open source intelligence links used in this episode are available on RadioCSIRT.com. See you soon for a new episode. Take care. Goodbye.